You are listening to CEO Perspectives, a podcast by the Conference Board.
Welcome to this episode of CEO Perspectives, a new podcast series by the Conference Board. CEO Perspectives are conversations that take an objective, data-driven look at a range of timely topics that matter most to business executives. To help make sense of these topics and how they'll unfold, we'll sit down with thought leaders and do what we do best at the Conference Board, provide insights for what's ahead. I'm Steve Odland, the CEO of the Conference Board and the host of this podcast series. And today's conversation will focus on energy independence. And joining me today is Vicky Bailey, the principal of Anderson Stratton Enterprises, prior owner of BHMM Energy Services, and the former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Energy. By the way, we're also very fortunate to have Vicky as a trustee of the Conference Board. Vicky, welcome to the program today.
Thank you, Steve.
So, Vicky, let's just start. You have so much. I've just barely touched on your experience. You have so many decades of experience in the energy industry and in energy policy. Maybe you could just share a few of the highlights of your experiences.
I'd love to, Steve. It's a great opportunity, and thank you for giving me this time. And where do I begin? I don't want to go back to the very beginning, but you when you said decades of experiences, I do want to kind of
Well,
maybe
don't go
first.
back to the pre-electric era. You're not that far back, Vicky.
Exactly.
Somewhere in between.
I want to be
After
careful.
Edison, but before Tesla,
No, it was actually 1986, and that's all I'll give you. Gosh, my journey into this arena truly was as a novice, but I've come to have a passion for it. I've come to have a few foundational principles as it relates to my ability to make decisions and participate in policy decisions. As you said, I've been a commissioner both at the state level and at the federal level. I've been an assistant secretary. I've been a corporate executive, and now I'm sitting on many corporate boards. It's access to energy has been a foundational issue for me, and it truly started early. And I recognize, one, that as a commissioner, you know, I want to balance the issues. I want to balance the issues of the consumer, the customer, both commercial and industrial and residential. And I want to balance it in a way that keeps the entities that serve and supply our needs both healthy and stable, and I want them to provide access to affordable, secure energy. And so I don't think those two are at odds with each other. I think obviously we want our corporations to be healthy, we want them to be stable. And I think in that way they can make the investments, the needed investments that they need to make in order to access supply and give us reliable supply as well.
Yeah,
So
right.
those are kind of my
So,
foundational issues.
yeah, and that's so important for whether you're a household or a business. But you were Assistant Secretary of the Department of Energy from 2001 to 2004,
Correct.
and you were really focused on and did a great job with energy policy. How would you describe the U.S. energy policy while you were there versus now? And are we in a better place, a worse place? How would you compare them?
In 2001, 2004, when I came in 2001, we probably were looking at policy, energy policy from the standpoint of scarcity because we hadn't made the innovations in some of the technology that we did later from the standpoint of being able to seismically, access deeper gas wells and oil wells because of the innovation of the hydraulic fracturing and the bit and all of that. And I know there's controversy around that, but to the extent that technology was factual and actually did what we wanted it to do, I have to raise that. But then I also joined the administration right before September 11th, 9/11. So that added a focus at the time on energy security. So to the extent that in 2001, 2004 timeframe, we were making policy from the vantage point of scarcity, our global neighbors were strategically important, and we were strategically inextricably linked together from the standpoint of what was going on in the world, what was going on around us, the tragic, horrible events of 9/11, and then trying to stabilize the ship and move forward from the standpoint of working with our neighbors. And energy security was extremely important, and harnessing our domestic resources was extremely important.
Yeah, and you were part of the the whole move to what I would call an all of the above strategy. It
Correct.
was let's use our natural resources. Let's move towards U.S. energy independence.
Yes.
Let's try to move towards renewables where we can, but continue to use non-renewables as we need. So, how would you describe today's energy policy vis-a-vis the policy in that time?
Today, we are more, we have the ability to make policy from the strategic vantage point of abundance. We were looking, we wanted natural gas, we wanted other sources, renewable sources. We were looking at all of that coming into the U.S. Now, as things have advanced, we're now exporters of natural gas, exporters of oil, and obviously there are controversial issues to some, but I'm just talking factually from the standpoint of having access to our natural resources and being able to export them to other parts of the world that need them, as natural gas has been able to provide energy access to areas of the country, which I said is something very important to me. So I think that that was a strategic move on our part, as well as with oil. I think it was very strategically an advancement there as well. So to the extent that we now can make policy and make decisions from the vantage point of abundance, I think it's opened up a lot of areas for us. So to make a difference in the world.
Yeah, and the supply is there, I think is what you're
Supply is
saying, and
yes,
the domestic supply is there for us to be energy independent, but some
yes,
of the latest moves have been to shut down, a lot of the drilling, the access, not put in the pipeline and really try to move away from coal, all of which in the long run, makes sense, in an era where you're trying to also balance the carbon dioxide, but so we're not really using all of that abundance today. And then now we see prices going up and people were calling on OPEC to produce more oil. How do you square all that?
it's a balance. Once again, I go back to that word of balance because I think that's needed to the extent that we're concerned environmentally. We're concerned. We want what we do, what we produce, to be environmentally sustainable. We all should be good stewards of the environment. I'm not saying that we're doing these making these advancements ignoring environmental issues. I'm not saying to do that.
Right.
But energy demand will be there, the demand will be there. We want to be able to supply that demand. We want to be able to have a grid system that is resilient. We want to have the ability to have reliability. In our own country here, we've seen extreme weather issues, extreme, fires, things that have impacted the ability to supply and the ability that has constricted access to energy in ways that we hadn't confronted before.
Right.
So,
Right.
to the extent that the abundance that we have can be, the environmental impacts can be mitigated and sustain the grid, that's a balancing act that we're asking our corporations, our entities that supply the energy to do. So I think that's important.
Yeah. Well, you were appointed to the Commission on America's Nuclear Future in 2010.
Correct.
And, back in the 80s, we looked at, as a country, we were looking at nuclear as a potential source of carbon free emissions,
Hmm.
long term, reliable. uptime, and some of the European countries actually went there, and I think
Mhm.
France was an example of that. But that seems to have gone away. What's the current status of the U.S. nuclear energy industry?
So let me just say, as I said, all of the above. I
Yep.
I I believe that I believe in that, and I can obviously talk about my reasons. But if we look at the decarbonization, which is the word now, as folks are going on to Glasgow, I guess in a week or so, we're looking at folks start talk about reaching net zero, which isn't necessarily zero emissions, but net zero. I don't think you get there without nuclear. It is a 24/7 emissions free source of energy. The issue with nuclear and technology wise, we have the ability to do SMRs, or what they call small modular reactors. The issues that people will raise, and they're valid concerns, are all valid, and we have to be able to respond to them and answer them. To the extent folks are worried about safety, if we don't operate the current nuclear fleet safely, you're right, we'll have problems having a nuclear future. And I say that because one of the commissioners on the at the nuclear board had said that if we don't operate this one safely, we'll have a hard time moving forward. So that's one thing. I know safety is key. The other is the issue of waste. Some people call it spent fuel. Some people call it waste. We have to have a plan, and that was what the commission that I was appointed to was designed to look at, the back end of the nuclear cycle, what to do with the waste. And there
And you came up with the
I
site in Nevada, and it was killed. But there's also the security of that waste too, right?
the
Because so
security
much
of
of
that
that,
waste,
yeah,
so much of that, because the waste is now at the different sites, at the different
yeah.
entities. Some of the entities have been decommissioned, and we've got guns and guards, at sites, and we're spending those funds to do that. And there are other tax implications, other job implications of this as we move forward. So it's complex. It's not a black and white situation. So
No, it certainly is, and the regulatory process is really daunting and expensive, and what does it take, a dozen years to get through the regulatory
well,
process? And so it's,
uh,
and so there are no nuclear reactors in the pipeline currently,
well,
correct?
I think we're finishing one, aren't we? Now, see, now you're gonna ask me something that I probably should have looked up for you, but I
Sorry
think it's
about that.
The Vogel plant,
Right,
and,
yeah, yeah, that's
yeah,
right,
so we
one more.
we we have one that we're trying to complete,
Get over the finish
and
line.
so that's good. But you're right, no new ones have been announced. But like I said, I'm also thinking, the SMRs have small modular reactors, have some potential as well from the standpoint of a new technology to look at. Mhm.
Right. We're talking about energy policy with Vicky Bailey. Next, we're going to look at the future of renewable energy and the reliability and security of the grid specifically. We're going to take a short break and be right back with more of our conversation.
Interested in this content? You can find this and much more at our conference board website, www.conference-board.org. Or, even better, contact our membership team and your company can enjoy the benefits of our in-depth research around the economy, environmental, social, and governance issues, public policy, marketing and communications, and human capital. As a member of the conference board, you will be able to have full access to all of our cutting-edge research, leading indicators, benchmarking, and data services, in addition to webcasts and podcasts such as the one you are enjoying now.
Welcome back to CEO Perspectives. I'm your host, Steve Odland, the CEO of the Conference Board, and I'm joined today by a leading voice of energy policy, Vicky Bailey. Vicky, everyone talks about renewables, and gosh, it would be great if we could get this going. I mean, but we're only at about 15% of total energy, electricity being provided by wind and solar today. And then the problem is, the wind doesn't blow all the time, and the sun doesn't shine all the time, so they become problematic as they are episodic. Talk about the renewables industry and where you see things going.
So renewables should be and have been part of the portfolio for energy supply. People talk about renewables and they talk about their intermittency or their variability, however you want to talk about them. They are a valid source of supply.
Right,
And
right.
what you have to think about, or at least what I think about, is regional issues. Where can you place the turbines? Where is the wind in the country? Where are the cycles the best? With solar, where should you place those? So they are a valid source for regions of the country. So I'm not I wouldn't disparage renewables at all. We need them all. We need them as part of the mix because when we have our peak and off peak times, what happens is from the standpoint of base load, they need backup from the standpoint of trying to maintain base load. So like a natural gas or other fuel source in order to make sure that the system remains resilient and reliable.
Right, and the baseload issue is, making sure that when the renewable sources go down, in other words, the wind stops blowing, you've got something there to keep all of our needs going. But, there that brings you to the topic of battery storage because, the killer app here is if you could have great battery storage so
That
that when the wind blows, you store it, when the sun shines, you store it, and then that then becomes a load leveler. That would seem to be, the way to go, but our battery technology is not quite there. Talk about what you're hearing in battery technology.
So once again, we are making advancements. We're
Yeah.
we're much further along. I think one of the questions you asked me earlier, where are we? Are we moving forward or are we going backwards? No, we are moving forward. And when I say technology, you will hear the industry, many in the industry say, well, we can do 80%. We can figure out 80% of how to get to net zero. But that last 20% is going to take technology. And one of those technologies is battery storage. Yes, and there are many entrepreneurs, many entities trying to do this. I can't, I'm off of my head. I'm not able to name one, but I know that they're out there, they're doing it. Battery storage is kind of like the next wave. And that's important as well. We have to think about the technology. Even some of your legacy utilities and entities are buying in probably into battery storage. So
Yeah, and, part of the problem is even with lithium ion technology, you're reliant on rare earth minerals, which are only in certain areas and require
correct,
mining, and so that
correct.
there is an environmental impact on these things. But
So we're looking to talk about that, Steve. I think they're also looking at trying to make more of that here in the US as well,
yeah.
because a lot of these, which we've learned over the past year and a half, the supply chain of getting all of that and where we may get it from, it has some concerned, and so are looking some of the industry are looking to do something about it. So
Yeah, but I'm hearing, some new technologies like sodium-based batteries, which have high hopes, and of course, it's a plentiful mineral. So, there's good stuff in the labs today. We just
in the pipeline.
Yeah, so
Hmm.
hopefully we'll get it commercialized here. Well, you served also as a trustee of the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. That's probably not a household brand name, but it's a not-for-profit international regulatory authority, and your mission was to assure reliability and in security of the grid. First of all, what's the grid? I mean, everybody's probably got some notion of it's all those wires that run around, but what's the grid, from an energy
Right.
expert's perspective?
The grid is from where the electricity is produced to getting it to you and me and the other consumers. So I say that from the standpoint of where it's produced, the entities that are into generation, distribution, and transmission, the utilities that are doing that. Then it is transmitted overhead, transmission wires over cables overhead, and then now you have those who want to bury the cables. So we're trying to do a little bit of both, but probably for the most part, you think about overhead transmission lines. And that's what happens when there is extreme weather. You then see, pole lines that are snapped in two, as we saw horribly in the case of the weather event of Ida. Most recently, there have been others. So, from the standpoint of, the lineman is probably the lineman or line woman is probably the most important person in the field. So, I don't want to minimize the important jobs that these men and women do. But the grid, obviously, yes, it's something that, when we flip that switch, we probably don't think of what all is entailed from the standpoint of technology in getting it to you and in getting to keeping the lights on.
And there's been so many weather issues. I mean, you mentioned, the latest Hurricane Ida, but every ice storm in the Northeast, where you've got a lot
Every
of overhead, the fires in California, which
The
affected
fires
the
in
water.
California,
So everybody
right,
says,
where
why
they
don't you just,
turned it off.
yeah, why don't
Mhm.
you just bury them instead of putting them overhead? But that's
Well,
really, really expensive and
it's
takes a long
expensive too.
time. But what do we have to do to bulletproof, quote unquote, bulletproof the grid? In other words, make it
Yeah, let's not
reliable.
say that, Steve. Let's not say
Yeah.
that. Let's say because we've had some people shoot at
Oh,
transformer things, so let's not say that.
oh
Okay.
boy. Oh, that's another
But,
thing. Yeah. So how do we, what do we do here to make it the security and make it reliable?
well, let's just say we probably cannot. We It would be entirely too expensive, too capital extensive to make it 100% reliable. To build the grid and give it the resilience, and you hear about hardening of the transmission grid. We do need to put more into our infrastructure, though. I will say that. I know one of the things that the new administration is talking about is infrastructure issues, and I think in one or two, I truly have not read all those bills, but embedded in there, I believe, was some funds as it relates to transmission grid and other infrastructure issues. So parts of our grid are, I can't even begin to say how many years old they are, but this is a system that's been as reliable as it can be, has given us access to energy, has allowed our economy to grow, has allowed us to have the quality of life. And so now we need to invest in it. We have to invest in the grid in order to keep that going and keep this engine that we all enjoy going.
Yeah, and we've been talking about electricity, but the
Yes.
other thing that's been strung with it is, everything with cable and telephone, and so, the grid has been
Broadband, all of that,
broadband,
all of
a
that,
all of
all of
that, so
that.
all of our communication methods now are sort of tied to this grid, and so it really is important that we maintain it.
Very
So,
important.
we as a society are moving to electric everything, we're from everything we use in our homes, of course, our phones that are charged all the time, and our computers, and now cars. And it sounds great, but are we kind of putting too much pressure on the grid by putting and does that make us less energy secure by doing that?
It's a good thing to see the economy growing. It's a good thing to see electric vehicles, EVs, all of this. It's called growth. It's called the growth of the economy. It's called demand. The When we look at energy policy, we're looking at supply and we're looking at demand. So now you're talking about the demand side. There's the push and the pull side of it. So, the demand is there. It's it's impacted by a lot of things, even geopolitical things. Events impact our policies and what we're able to do from the standpoint of trying to meet demand. And that's where we are. I mean, that's where the discussion is right now. That's what many utility CEOs, energy CEOs are looking at: how to meet this demand. There's a short, in golf. There's your short game, and then it's the rest of the fairway. But I mean, the short game is how do we keep it reliable? How do we meet these ever compounding extreme weather issues and fires and all the things that impact the grid and impact energy supply. Because if you remember in Texas, that was a hodgepodge of it all. Natural gas, the thermal part of it, as well as, electricity and renewables, all of it came together there during the earlier incidents in Texas earlier this year. So it's trying to meet that demand. We try to forecast. We try to listen to scientists and forecasters. I know our own Department of Energy, their area of EIA, they put out reports all the time. I think they put out a recent one on the global demand for natural gas. So these are things that we try to look at. We try to CEOs are trying to look at and predict what they need to do, but these are capital intensive and long lived decisions.
Yeah.
And that's why, if we're going to meet the demand, many of those decisions have to be made now for the future.
And hence your point on needing investment. But if we move away from gasoline engines, internal combustion engines, for example, with cars, and that's theoretically good. But if the grid isn't reliable and if the power goes down, you're going to have a lot of those Teslas sitting on the side of the road in California during those during
Let's
the.
let's not think of that. but
We're
but
gonna
don't worry, we're gonna figure it out.
just ignore that man behind the curtain. We're not going to talk about that. Well, final question. You can't talk about energy without coming at it from a national security perspective. And,
Yes.
you talked about that earlier. Are we secure? And, what are our vulnerabilities right now?
We're constantly assessing that. I think that's the best way to put it. And we're good at it. We're good at it. I guess you can say until we're not, right? Until there's an incident or something like that. But we've got all the minds on this, from the standpoint of cyber issues. Here's where you get into cybersecurity. And we're focused like a laser on that. I can tell you that. I don't have, inside baseball from the standpoint of maybe what some of the other CEOs may know, but we're focused like a laser on it. And obviously it's an issue. Security is an issue for each individual corporation, each individual company, and even in our own personal lives, the security of that mobile phone or other devices in our home, and even our cars. Our cars are now pretty much computers, and you think about that, and so the cybersecurity focus is real. It's important, and we are pretty good at having eyes inside and in areas where we need to be able to see into in order to avert the threats that may be out there. This is a constant battle. It's a true hand-to-hand combat when it comes to
But it's
cybersecurity.
good news that just hearing you say that we're good at it. Vicky Bailey, thanks so much for joining us and providing our listeners today with a roundup of insights on the state and trajectory of the energy policy in the United States. And thanks to all of you for listening to CEO Perspectives. Every few weeks, I'll be joined by a leader from one of our centers or business executives to provide insights on the issues of our time. We'll cover leading topics in public policy, environmental social governance, marketing communications, economy, human capital, and more. Please share CEO Perspectives with your colleagues because I know that they're going to want to listen to us. I'm Steve Odland, and this podcast has been brought to you by the Conference Board.
You have been listening to CEO Perspectives, a podcast by the Conference Board.